You ever wonder what you'd do if you stumbled across something that could change your life forever? I mean, really think about it for a second. Would you do the right thing, or would temptation get the better of you? Drop a comment below and tell me, because what happened to me on Route 66 last month still keeps me up at night, and I'm betting it'll make you question everything you think you know about doing what's right. Name's Tommy Rodriguez, but everyone on the CB calls me Thunder, on account of the way my Kenworth W900 sounds when I'm hammered down on the interstate. Been pushing 18 wheels across this beautiful country for going on 18 years now, and brother, I thought I'd seen every kind of crazy the road could throw at me. Turns out I hadn't seen nothing yet. This whole mess started on what seemed like just another ordinary Tuesday morning. Me rolling westbound on the legendary Route 66, somewhere between Flagstaff and Seligman in the heart of Arizona desert country. I was hauling a load of furniture from Memphis to San Diego. Nothing too exciting, just good, honest work that kept the bills paid and diesel in the tank. Had my CB radio tuned to Channel 19 like always, listening to the usual morning chatter from my fellow road warriors. Reports about speed traps, construction zones, and Diesel Dan griping about the price of coffee at the last truck stop. The Arizona sun was just starting to climb over the horizon, painting those red rock formations in colors that'd make a postcard jealous, and I was feeling pretty good about life in general. The air conditioning was humming nice and cool. My thermos was full of that strong black coffee I'd picked up at the Flying J in Flagstaff, and I had about 8 hours of driving ahead of me before I'd need to take my mandatory rest break. That's when I spotted her in my peripheral vision, this tiny, elderly woman standing beside what looked like a broken-down sedan that had definitely seen better days. Now, I've passed plenty of stranded motorists over the years, and usually there's already help on the way, or at least another good Samaritan lending a hand. But this lady? She was all by herself, waving her arms like she was trying to signal a rescue plane, looking smaller than a tumbleweed against that vast desert landscape. Something about the desperation in her movements just didn't sit right with me, you know? The way she kept looking up and down the highway, clutching what appeared to be a suitcase to her chest, like it contained the crown jewels or something. My first instinct was to keep on trucking. Company policy was crystal clear about unauthorized stops. No picking up strangers, no getting involved in roadside situations that weren't our business, and definitely no playing hero on company time. My dispatcher, Martinez, had been real clear about that after I'd helped that family with the flat tire near Gallup last year. "Tommy," he'd said, pointing his finger at me like a disappointed father, "your job is moving freight from point A to point B, not running a roadside assistance service. We got insurance to worry about, liability issues and schedules to keep. You start making unauthorized stops, and next thing you know, we're dealing with lawsuits and missed deliveries." A dun, but as I watched that woman in my side mirror, getting smaller and smaller as I rolled past, something deep in my gut told me this situation was different somehow. That's when the voice of my old mentor started echoing in my head like it always did when I faced these kinds of moral crossroads. Big Eddie Kowalski, God rest his soul, was the crusty old-timer who'd taught me everything I knew about life on the road when I was just a green kid fresh out of trucking school. "Listen up, Thunder," he used to say, while we were parked at some greasy spoon diner stirring sugar into his coffee with a plastic spoon. "The highway's gonna test your character more than any Sunday sermon ever will. When you see someone in genuine need, you don't ask questions about company policy or worry about your delivery schedule, you just help. That's the trucker's code, and it's been that way since the first 18-wheeler hit the pavement. Eddie had been running these roads since the 1960s, back when Route 66 was still the main artery pumping life through the heart of America, and that old coot had never steered me wrong about anything important. I grabbed my CB mic and keyed up, my thumb hesitating for just a second before I pressed the button. "Breaker 19, this is Thunder westbound at mile marker 87. Got an elderly lady stranded roadside with what looks like a breakdown. Any bears in the area, copy?" The radio crackled with static for a moment before Road Dog, a regular I knew from the Flagstaff truck stop, came back over the airwaves. "Thunder, this is Road Dog. Negative on any smokies in your 20, good buddy. You thinking about playing hero again?" I couldn't help but chuckle despite the situation. Word travels fast on the CB, and apparently my reputation for helping stranded motorists had preceded me. "Something like that, Road Dog. Can't just leave an old lady out here in the desert heat. Thunder clear and gone." I found a safe spot about a quarter-mile ahead where the shoulder widened out enough for my rig, threw on my four-way flashers, and started the careful process of backing up along the roadside. The woman was still there when I got closer, and I could see she was probably in her mid-70s, wearing a faded blue dress with tiny flowers on it, and clutching that brown leather suitcase like her life depended on it. What struck me most wasn't her age or her obvious distress, it was her eyes. Most stranded motorists have this panicked, helpless look like deer caught in headlights. But this lady? Her eyes held something different. A strange mixture of fear and determination that I couldn't quite put my finger on. Like she was running from something but also running towards something at the same time. I climbed down from my cab and approached slowly, keeping my hands visible and my voice calm. 20 years on the road teaches you to read people fast, and this lady was wound tighter than a truck stop clock spring. "Morning, Mum," I called out, keeping about 10 feet of distance between us. "Looks like you're having some car trouble. Name's Tommy Rodriguez, and I'm wondering if I can lend a hand." She studied me for what felt like a full minute. Those sharp blue eyes, taking in everything from my worn Peterbilt cap to my steel-toed boots, like she was trying to decide if I was friend or foe. The desert wind was picking up, blowing sand across the asphalt and making that old Buick's hood creak as it cooled down. Finally, she spoke in a voice that carried the weight of years and worry. "I'm Margaret Sinclair, and Mr. I think you might just be an answer to prayer." Her accent had that distinctive Southwest twang that comes from decades of living under the big sky. "My car just up and died on me about an hour ago. Engine started making this terrible grinding noise, then just nothing." She gestured helplessly at the old sedan, which I could now see was a late 80s Buick LeSabre that had definitely seen better decades. Steam was still rising from under the hood, and I could smell that distinctive scent of overheated antifreeze mixed with burning oil. But here's what really caught my attention, the way she never let go of that suitcase. It was old-fashioned brown leather, the kind they don't make anymore, with brass corners and a handle worn smooth from years of use. She held it against her chest like it contained the most precious thing in the world, and every time a car passed by, she'd tense up and scan the vehicle like she was expecting trouble. "Mrs. Sinclair," I said, popping the hood of her car and immediately getting hit with a cloud of steam and the acrid smell of burnt metal. "Looks like your engine's seized up pretty good. This old girl's not going anywhere under her own power." The look that crossed her face wasn't just disappointment, it was pure terror. Oh no, this can't be happening," she whispered, clutching that suitcase even tighter. "I have to get to Los Angeles by tonight. It's a matter of life and death." Now, I've heard plenty of sob stories over the years from people trying to get free rides or sympathy, but something in her voice told me this wasn't an act. This was genuine fear, the kind that comes from real consequences waiting down the road. "Mom, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, but this engine's deader than disco," I said, wiping my hands on a shop rag. "You're looking at a complete rebuild, if it's even worth fixing. But hey, don't panic just yet. I'm heading west myself, and I could give you a ride to the next town. There's a Greyhound station in Seligman about 30 miles up the road. You could catch a bus from there to LA. That's when she did something that completely threw me for a loop. She started crying, not the frustrated tears of someone dealing with car trouble, but deep, soul-wrenching sobs that seemed to come from somewhere much deeper than a broken-down Buick. "You don't understand," she said between sobs. "I can't take a bus. I can't go through any kind of official channels, and I can't leave this behind." She held up the suitcase, and for the first time I noticed her hands were shaking. "Mr. Rodriguez, I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need to ask you something, and I need you to really think about your answer before you give it to me." She wiped her eyes with a tissue from her purse and looked me straight in the eye. "How much do you trust your own judgment about people? Because I'm about to tell you something that's going to change both our lives, and once I say it, there's no going back. Now, I've been around the block enough times to know when someone's about to drop a bombshell on me, and every instinct I had was screaming at me to politely decline whatever she was about to propose, help her gather her things, and get back on the road. But there was something about Margaret Sinclair. Maybe it was the way she carried herself despite being scared out of her mind. Or maybe it was the fact that she'd asked me to really think about my answer instead of just trying to manipulate me into saying yes. Whatever it was, I found myself nodding slowly. "Mrs. Sinclair, I've been making judgment calls about people for 42 years, and I'm still here to talk about it. What's on your mind?" She took a deep breath, looked up and down the highway to make sure we were still alone, and then opened that suitcase just wide enough for me to see inside. What I saw made my knees go weak and my mouth go dry. Stacks and stacks of $100 bills, more money than I'd ever seen in one place in my entire life, all neatly bundled and packed tight as sardines. "Mr. Rodriguez," she said quietly, "there's $2 million in this suitcase, and if I don't get it to Los Angeles by midnight tonight, 3 innocent people are going to die." I stared at that suitcase for what felt like an eternity, my brain trying to process what I was seeing. $2 million in cash. Sitting in the middle of the Arizona desert with a 70-something-year-old woman who looked like she should be baking cookies for her grandkids, not carrying around enough money to buy a small town. "Ma'am," I said slowly, my voice coming out rougher than I intended, "I think you better start from the beginning, because what you're telling me sounds like something out of a movie." Margaret closed the suitcase with a sharp click and glanced nervously at a pickup truck that was approaching from the east. She didn't relax until it passed us by without slowing down. 43 years ago, I married a man named Robert Sinclair. Good man, hard worker, owned a small construction company in Phoenix. What I didn't know was that Bobby had gotten himself mixed up with some very dangerous people to keep his business afloat during the recession in the early 80s. Her voice took on that distant quality people get when they're remembering painful things. "He borrowed money from the wrong crowd, Mr. Rodriguez, the kind of people who don't send collection letters when you're late on payments." She sat down heavily on her car's bumper, suddenly looking every one of her 76 years. "Bobby died 3 years ago. Heart attack, the doctors said. But on his deathbed, he told me about a safety deposit box in Los Angeles that contained enough money to pay off his old debts, plus interest. He made me promise that if anything ever happened, if these people ever came looking for what he owed them, I'd take that money and make things right." The desert wind was picking up, and I could see storm clouds building on the horizon. We were going to get weather, and soon. 2 weeks ago, they showed up at my door, she continued, her voice barely above a whisper. 3 men in expensive suits who knew things about Bobby's business that I'd never heard before. They told me Bobby owed their organization $2.5 million, and that his debt had transferred to me when he died. They gave me 30 days to come up with the money or... She trailed off, but I could fill in the blanks. These weren't the kind of people who accepted payment plans. "Mrs. Sinclair," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "why didn't you go to the police? This sounds like extortion to me." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Mr. Rodriguez, these aren't street thugs we're talking about. These are people with connections, people who've been operating in the shadows for decades. The police can't protect me from them, and even if they could, what about my daughter and her family? What about my grandson who just started college?" The way she said it told me she'd already considered every option and found them all wanting. "So you went to Los Angeles and got the money," I said, starting to piece together her story. She nodded. Took me 2 days to work up the courage, but yes. Bobby had left detailed instructions about the bank, the safety deposit box number, everything. The money was there just like he said it would be, 2 million in cash, plus some documents I didn't understand. She patted the suitcase protectively. I was supposed to drive straight back to Phoenix and meet them tonight at midnight. But then, my car. She gestured helplessly at the steaming Buick. And you can't call them to explain, because, I prompted, because they specifically told me that any deviation from the plan, any contact with law enforcement, any attempt to involve other people, and the deal was off. They'd consider it a betrayal, and they'd take their payment in other ways. The implication hung in the desert air like the smell of creosote after rain. These people weren't just threatening her, they were threatening her family. I found myself in the kind of situation that truckers' nightmares are made of. On one hand, I had a schedule to keep, a load to deliver, and a company policy that strictly forbade getting involved in situations like this. On the other hand, I had an elderly woman with $2 million in cash, running from what sounded like organized crime, with innocent lives hanging in the balance. And the clock was ticking. It was already past noon, and Phoenix was still 4 hours away, assuming we didn't hit traffic or weather delays. Mrs. Sinclair, I said, making a decision that I knew was going to change everything, I need you to be completely honest with me about something. Is there any chance at all, that this money isn't legitimate? Because if I'm going to help you, I need to know exactly what I'm getting myself into. She looked me straight in the eye, and I saw something there that convinced me more than any words could have. Mr. Rodriguez, I've been a Sunday school teacher for 30 years, a volunteer at the local hospital for 15, and I've never so much as gotten a speeding ticket. This money represents everything my husband worked for his entire life, and it's the only thing standing between my family and people who don't hesitate to hurt innocent folks to make a point. That's when I heard the rumble of thunder in the distance and felt the first drops of rain starting to fall. The storm that had been building on the horizon was moving in fast, and we were about to be caught in the open with $2 million in cash and nowhere to hide. "Ma'am," I said, grabbing her suitcase and her small overnight bag, "we need to get moving right now. That storm's going to hit us hard, and standing out here in the open isn't safe for a lot of reasons." As I helped her up into my cab, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was crossing a line I'd never be able to uncross. But sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks that scare you more than anything you've ever faced before. As we pulled back onto Route 66 with Margaret buckled into my passenger seat and that suitcase secured behind us, the first real drops of rain started hitting my windshield like bullets. Arizona desert storms don't mess around. They come fast, hit hard, and turn the landscape into something that looks like the end of the world. Within minutes, we were driving through a wall of water that made my wipers work overtime just to give me glimpses of the road ahead. "This is exactly what I was afraid of," Margaret said, gripping the door handle so tight her knuckles were white. "Every minute we're delayed is another minute closer to—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. I keyed up my CB radio, hoping to get some intel from other drivers about road conditions ahead. "Breaker 19, this is Thunder eastbound. I mean westbound on Route 66, approaching Seligman. How's it looking ahead of us, good buddies?" The radio crackled with static for a moment before Diesel Duke's familiar voice came through the speakers. "Thunder, this is Duke, about 20 miles ahead of your 20. Brother, you picked a hell of a day to be running this stretch. Got reports of flash flooding near Williams, and the highway patrol's talking about closing I-40 if this keeps up. You might want to find a place to hole up until this blows over." Margaret heard every word, and I watched the color drain from her face. "Mr. Rodriguez, we can't stop. We absolutely cannot stop. If I don't make it to Phoenix by midnight—" Her voice trailed off, but the desperation in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. I'd made a commitment to help this woman, and backing out now wasn't an option, storm or no storm. "Mrs. Sinclair, I've been driving through weather like this for 18 years. We're going to make it, but I need you to trust me and stay calm. Panic doesn't help anybody in situations like this. That's when she told me something that made my blood run cold. There's something else I haven't told you, she said, her voice barely audible over the sound of rain hammering my roof. When I picked up the money in Los Angeles, I think someone followed me. A black SUV with tinted windows. I first noticed it when I left the bank, and I swear I saw the same vehicle at the gas station where I stopped for lunch yesterday. She was staring out the passenger window, watching the desert landscape blur past in the storm. What if they know about you now? What if by helping me, you've put yourself in danger too? The thought had already occurred to me, but hearing her say it out loud made it real in a way that scared me more than I wanted to admit. I'd spent my entire career staying out of other people's problems, keeping my head down and focusing on moving freight from point A to point B. Now here I was, driving through a desert storm with an elderly woman carrying $2 million in mob money, possibly being followed by people who wouldn't hesitate to eliminate witnesses. "Margaret," I said, using her first name for the first time. "We're in this together now. Whatever happens, we see it through to the end." As we approached the town of Seligman, I made a decision that went against every instinct I had as a professional driver. Instead of taking the main route through town, where we'd be visible to anyone looking for us, I turned off onto old Route 66, the original alignment that most people had forgotten about since the interstate was built. It was a rougher road, slower going, but it would keep us out of sight and give us options if we needed to disappear quickly. "Where are we going?" Margaret asked, noticing the change in direction. "Taking the scenic route," I replied, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "Sometimes the old ways are the best ways." The storm was getting worse, and visibility was down to maybe 50 feet. My CB was crackling with reports of accidents, road closures, and drivers pulling over to wait it out. But we couldn't wait. Every minute that passed was another minute closer to Margaret's midnight deadline, and I could feel the weight of that responsibility pressing down on me like the storm clouds overhead. That's when I saw something in my side mirror that made my heart skip a beat. Headlights staying exactly the same distance behind us, despite the terrible driving conditions. Professional drivers know how to maintain safe following distances in weather like this, but this vehicle was matching our speed perfectly, never getting closer, never falling back. "Margaret," I said quietly, trying not to alarm her, "don't turn around, but I think we might have company." She tensed up immediately, her hand instinctively moving to the suitcase. "The black SUV?" she whispered. I couldn't tell the color in this weather, but the way it was following us wasn't natural. Could be. "We're going to find out real soon." I reached for my CB mic and switched to Channel 9, the emergency frequency. If things went sideways, I wanted to be able to call for help fast. That's when the vehicle behind us suddenly accelerated, closing the distance between us with a speed that told me everything I needed to know. These weren't good Samaritans checking on fellow travelers. These were people with a purpose, and that purpose probably involved the $2 million sitting in my cab. "Hold on, Margaret," I said, downshifting and feeling my Kenworth's engine respond with a growl that earned me my CB handle. "We're about to find out what this old girl can really do." The chase that followed was like something out of an action movie, except this was real life, with real consequences and real bullets when they started flying. The SUV pulled alongside us, and I could see the passenger window rolling down despite the rain. "Get down!" I shouted to Margaret, just as the first shots rang out. My passenger side mirror exploded in a shower of glass and plastic, and I felt the truck shudder as bullets punched through the sleeper compartment behind us. This wasn't a warning. These people were trying to kill us. I floored the accelerator and felt 18 wheels grab asphalt like my life depended on it, which it absolutely did. My Kenworth might not be built for high-speed chases, but she's got power when you need it, and right now I needed every horse under that hood. The SUV fell back momentarily, probably not expecting an 80,000-pound truck to suddenly surge forward like a rocket ship. Margaret was crouched down in the passenger seat, clutching that suitcase and praying in Spanish, prayers I recognized from my childhood, the kind you say when you think you might be meeting your maker real soon. "Stay down and hold on!" I shouted over the engine noise and the sound of rain hammering the windshield. The old Route 66 alignment was narrow and winding, with steep drop-offs on both sides that would turn any mistake into a fatal one. But I knew this road. I'd driven it dozens of times over the years, back when I was young and stupid enough to take the scenic route just for the hell of it. Every curve, every rise, every place where the asphalt crumbled away at the edges was burned into my memory like a road map of survival. The SUV caught up again, this time trying to ram us from behind. I felt the impact through my trailer, a bone-jarring collision that would have sent a smaller vehicle spinning off into the desert. But physics was on our side. You don't move 80,000 pounds easily, even with a high-performance engine and bad intentions. I used that weight to my advantage, letting them get close before hitting my brakes just enough to make them overshoot, then accelerating again before they could recover their position. That's when Margaret did something that surprised the hell out of me. She pulled a small revolver out of her purse, a snub-nose .38 that looked like it had been well-maintained but rarely used. "Mrs. Sinclair," I said, trying to keep my voice calm while dodging another ramming attempt, "please tell me you know how to use that thing." She looked at me with eyes that had gone from scared to determined in the space of a heartbeat. "Mr. Rodriguez, I may be a Sunday school teacher, but I'm also a widow who's lived alone in Phoenix for 3 years. Of course, I know how to use it." The SUV was trying to pull alongside us again, and I could see the passenger reloading his weapon. This was it, the moment where we either fought back or became statistics on a lonely stretch of desert highway. "When I give you the word," I told Margaret, "I want you to roll down that window and give them something to think about. Don't try to be a hero. Just make them back off long enough for me to get us out of this." She nodded grimly and checked the cylinder of her revolver with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd spent time at a shooting range. The landscape around us was changing as we climbed into the higher elevations approaching Williams. The storm was even worse up here, with wind gusts that made my trailer sway like a pendulum and visibility that came and went with each lightning flash. But I knew something our pursuers didn't. About 2 miles ahead, there was a truck stop that had been abandoned for years, with access roads that led back into the national forest. If I could get us there, we might have a chance to lose them in the maze of logging roads that crisscross the mountains. "Now!" I shouted, and Margaret rolled down her window despite the rain that immediately soaked the interior of my cab. The SUV was right there, close enough that I could see the shooter's face as he raised his weapon. Margaret's first shot spiderwebbed their windshield, and her second took out their driver's side headlight. The SUV swerved violently, fighting for control on the rain-slicked asphalt, and I used that moment to make my move. I yanked the wheel hard to the right, taking us off the main road and onto a gravel access road that led up into the forest. My trailer fishtailed wildly, and for a terrifying moment I thought we were going to jackknife and roll down the mountainside. But the truck held together, the tires found purchase, and we disappeared into the trees just as another lightning flash lit up the sky like the 4th of July. Behind us, I could hear the SUV trying to follow, but they were fighting a losing battle. Their low-slung vehicle wasn't built for the kind of terrain we were now navigating. We climbed steadily for about 10 minutes, my engine working hard in low gear, before I found what I was looking for. An old logging camp with a maintenance shed big enough to hide my truck. I backed us into the building and killed the engine. And suddenly, the only sounds were the rain on the metal roof and both of us breathing hard from the adrenaline. "Are they gone?" Margaret whispered, still clutching her revolver. I checked my mirrors and listened carefully, but all I could hear was the storm. "For now," I said, "but they'll be looking for us, and they know we're in this area." That's when Margaret told me the rest of the story. The part that explained why these people were so desperate to get their hands on that money and why 3 innocent lives hung in the balance. The documents in the suitcase, she said quietly. They're not just Bobby's old business records. They're evidence. Photographs, financial records, names and dates going back 20 years. Bobby wasn't just a debtor, Mr. Rodriguez. He was keeping insurance, documenting everything these people did, everyone they hurt, and now they know I have it. The weight of what she was telling me settled over the abandoned logging camp like a blanket of lead. We weren't just carrying $2 million. We were carrying enough evidence to bring down what sounded like a major criminal organization. And somewhere out there in the storm, people who killed for a living were hunting us with the kind of determination that comes from knowing their entire operation was at stake. "Margaret," I said, checking my watch and seeing that it was already past 4 o'clock. "We need to get moving. Phoenix is still 3 hours away, and we've got to assume they've called for backup." The storm was finally starting to break as we made our way back down to the main road. But I knew our troubles were far from over. Margaret had been quiet for the last 20 minutes, staring out at the desert landscape with the kind of 1,000-yard stare that comes from processing too much reality at once. "You know," she said finally, "when I woke up this morning, I thought the hardest part would be handing over the money and walking away. I never imagined I'd be in a gunfight with a truck driver I'd just met, running from killers through the Arizona wilderness." She managed a weak smile. "Life has a way of surprising you, doesn't it?" I was about to respond when my CB crackled to life with a transmission that made my blood freeze. "All units, be on the lookout for a blue Kenworth with Arizona plates, traveling westbound on Route 66 with an elderly female passenger. Suspects are armed and dangerous, wanted in connection with a bank robbery in Los Angeles. Approach with extreme caution." The voice was professional, official sounding, but I knew it was fake. These people had resources, connections, and they were using them to turn every law enforcement officer in Arizona into their personal hunting party. "They're good," Margaret said grimly. "Bobby always said they had people everywhere. Police departments, government agencies, even the FBI. That's why he never went to the authorities, why he kept his insurance policy hidden for so long." She opened the suitcase and pulled out a manila envelope thick with documents. "These papers represent 20 years of evidence, Mr. Rodriguez. Names, dates, photographs, financial records. If this information ever became public, it would destroy dozens of careers and send some very powerful people to prison for the rest of their lives. I made a decision that went against every survival instinct I'd developed in 2 decades of trucking. Instead of heading straight for Phoenix, I turned south toward Flagstaff, taking us deeper into the mountains where the cell phone coverage was spotty and the radio chatter was minimal. "What are you doing?" Margaret asked, noticing the change in direction. "We're going to level the playing field," I replied, pulling into a truck stop that I knew had secure parking and a mechanic who didn't ask too many questions. "If they want to play games, we're going to change the rules." My friend Jake Martinez had been running his garage for 15 years, specializing in modifications that weren't exactly legal, but were sometimes necessary for drivers who found themselves in unusual situations. When I explained what we needed, without going into too much detail about why, he didn't hesitate. "Give me 2 hours, he said, looking at my truck with the practiced eye of someone who'd seen it all. "I can make some adjustments that'll give you options if things get hairy again." While Jake worked, Margaret and I sat in his office, planning our next move and trying to figure out how to turn a desperate situation into something we could survive. That's when Margaret made a suggestion that was either brilliant or completely insane. "What if we don't run?" she said, spreading the documents out on Jake's desk. "What if we go on the offensive? These people have been operating in the shadows for decades, using fear and intimidation to control everyone around them. But what if we took that power away from them?" She pulled out a photograph that showed 3 men in expensive suits standing next to a construction site. This picture was taken in 1987. The man in the middle is Senator Richard Blackwood, who's been pushing for deregulation of the trucking industry. The man on the left is Vincent Torino, who supposedly died in a car accident in 1995. And the man on the right is the same person who came to my door 2 weeks ago, claiming to represent Bobby's creditors. The implications hit me like a freight train. We weren't just dealing with organized crime. We were dealing with corruption that went all the way to the top of the political food chain. Margaret, I said slowly, if what you're showing me is real, then we're not just fighting for your family's safety. We're fighting for something a lot bigger than that. She nodded grimly. Bobby spent 20 years documenting their operations, their connections, their methods. He knew that someday someone would have to make a choice between staying silent and doing what's right. I think that day is today. Jake finished his modifications just as the sun was setting, turning the Arizona sky into a canvas of orange and purple that would have been beautiful under different circumstances. My truck now had reinforced bumpers, run-flat tires, and a few other surprises that I hoped we wouldn't need, but was grateful to have. "You sure about this, Thunder?" Jake asked as we prepared to leave. "Once you start down this road, there's no going back." I looked at Margaret, sitting in my passenger seat with that suitcase full of evidence and $2 million, and I knew we'd already passed the point of no return hours ago. The drive to Phoenix took us through some of the most beautiful desert country in America, but I barely noticed the scenery. My attention was focused on the road ahead, the mirrors showing what was behind us, and the CB radio that crackled with increasingly urgent transmissions about our supposed crime spree. They were closing the net, using every resource at their disposal to track us down before we could reach our destination. But they'd made one crucial mistake. They'd underestimated what an old truck driver and a determined grandmother could accomplish when they decided to fight back. As we crested the final hill before Phoenix, Margaret reached over and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything, for stopping, for helping, for risking your life for a stranger. Bobby would have liked you, Mr. Rodriguez. He always said the measure of a man isn't what he does when people are watching, but what he does when nobody's looking and there's nothing in it for him." I squeezed back, feeling the weight of the moment and the responsibility we were carrying. "Mrs. Sinclair, we're about to find out if doing the right thing is enough to change the world. Either way, we're going to give it our best shot." The lights of Phoenix spread out before us like a galaxy of possibilities, and somewhere in that urban sprawl was a meeting that would determine whether justice prevailed or whether fear and corruption would continue to rule the day. As we descended into the valley, I keyed up my CB one last time. "Breaker 19, this is Thunder rolling into the Valley of the Sun. If anybody's listening out there, remember this. Sometimes the most important cargo you'll ever haul isn't freight. Sometimes it's hope, and sometimes it's the truth. And sometimes, if you're lucky, it's both." The radio fell silent, but I knew our message had been heard. In a few hours, the whole world would know the truth about Senator Blackwood, Vincent Torino, and the network of corruption that had been hiding in plain sight for decades. And it all started with an elderly woman whose car broke down on Route 66, and a truck driver who decided that some things are worth fighting for, no matter what the cost.